Hello and welcome to another exam paper walkthrough. Today we're looking at the Edexcel half paper series and we're looking at set 5, paper B, and this is a 1H paper, so the non-calculator version. So should be looking for, that should say 45 minutes, 45 minutes to complete the paper. We'll kick straight off. Question 1. 5 schools sent some students to a conference. One of the schools sent boys and girls. This school sent 16 boys. The ratio of number of boys to the number of girls was 1 to 2. The other 4 schools sent only girls. Each of the 5 schools sent the same number of students. Work out the total number of students and the conference for the 5 schools. So I'm going to start by looking at the ratio of boys to girls. For the first school, we were told was 1 to 2. And we were also told that there were 16 boys, which would mean that there are 32 girls. So making a total of 48 for that school. So that is one of 5 schools. So 5 times by 48 is going to give us 240. So I've just marked this for my year 11s, and I think I let some people off with 120, so I need to go back and check that. So 240 for the 4 marks. The exam paper said that it was, so I've already done a version of this today. It was 1 mark for working out that there would be 32 girls there. 1 mark for working out total from that one school was 48. And then a method mark for multiplying that by 5, and then an A1 mark for the 240. For question 2 then, we are looking at standard form question. So standard form with non-calculator. So you treat your number part and your indice part separately. So we're treating it 6 times by 4. That will be our number part, times by, and then our indice part 10 to the 8 times by 10 to the 7. So number part becomes 24, and then the indice part becomes, you add the powers, 10 to the 15, and then to convert that into standard form, that would need to be 2.4 times 10 to that, and we've increased it by another digit, so it would be to the power 16. And again, if you got, there were kind of a vary for the marking for this, an M1 for the method of treating the number and the indice part separately, and then an A1 for the answer. Alternatively though, you could have, if you got 24 anyway, you could have picked up one of the marks even if you didn't get the correct power. Or if you did it as a normal number and got 24 with 15 zeros, that would also be a 1 mark. For part 2, I misread this question when I did this earlier today. We're adding the powers. I took it as a divide, but we're supposed to be adding the powers. I find the most straightforward way to do this to make these both numbers to the highest power of 10. So I treated it as 6 times by 10 to the 8. And then as I write it down and put it over, I'm going to put this as to the power 10, to the power 8. So that number would become 0.4. And then when I add them together, 6.4 times 10 to the 8. And that saves me having to convert as a final step. So in theory, you could have converted them to both normal numbers. You could have added them as normal numbers, then converted. Or you could have put them both to the power 7 and treated it as 60 and 4 and then converted. But that's probably the most direct, quickest way of doing it. And again, it's 2 marks for that. 1 mark for a method to add them, whether that's as separate numbers, so as numbers rather than standard form, and then A1 for the answer. Okay, question 3 was an adding. So if I convert these to being over the same denominator, they've both got to be over 15. If I do that, I need to times the first fraction by 5, so it would be 5, and the second fraction by 3, so it would be 6, giving me 11 over 15. Again, for the second question, when you're multiplying improper fractions, you need to convert them to being, when you're multiplying mixed fractions, you need to convert them to being improper. So 2 times by 4 is 8, plus the 3 would give me 11 over 4, times by 1 times by 5 is 5, plus the 3 would give me 8 over 5. I personally would always cancel diagonally before I multiply, so I would cancel by a factor of 4 there to create a 2 there and a 1 there. So 11 times by 2 is 22 over 5, and that just made it a bit more straightforward. and you could get away with 22. So I actually wrote the answer as 4 2/5, which was the correct version. It does say in simplest form, but it doesn't really specify. I went for that because that's the same as the question format. But you could have got 22/5 was fine for the mark. That would have been fine. You could have also had 4.4. That would also be fine. All three were acceptable. And for that one, it was... Let me just... it was 1 method mark for converting them to both being improper fractions, 1 method mark for the multiplying method, and then an A1 for whichever of the 3 versions you had. Question 4. So if I just add a bit more information from the question, we're told that he drove, the speed on this part of the journey was 30 miles per hour. And the speed on this part of the journey was 40 miles per hour. So I did this as 2 separate parts. I said that the time for C to D would have been equal to the distance divided by the speed, which was 45 divided by 30, which was 1.5. And I left it as 1.5. I didn't convert it into hours and minutes. For D to E, same process, time is equal to distance divided by speed. So in this case, distance was 20 and the speed was 40. So that gives you a 0.5. So for the total journey, the speed is going to be equal to the total distance, which would be 45 plus 20, divided by the total time, which would have been 1.5 plus 0.5. So in other words, 65 divided by 2, which would have been 32.5. Marks for that were an M1 for working out the total time for either one, M1 for the method of total distance divided by total time, and then an A1 for 32.5. And then if we move on to question 5, this was like frustratingly easy. It was almost designed to try and catch you out with how easy it was. If you're told that it goes through where x is 0 and y is 3, it basically means we're looking for any equation that is in the form or can be arranged to the form of that. So it's just that one. For the second part, 2 lines are parallel. It means that they must have the same gradient. And again, it might be that we need to rearrange them, but currently we have 2 equations with the same gradient. So it's B and C. Just as a slight point, and I've never seen a question I've seen lots of questions like this, but I've never seen a question in an exam series where the answer, they will often ask, write down a letter and then ask a second part, but I've never seen the same letter appearing in both. Just, it's not very common. Again, it was just a B1 for either mark, for correct answer only. And then question 6. So we've got a cubic graph. Some of the values are filled in. We're just filling in. I started with these 2. So 0 cubed plus 2 times 0 minus 1 is just minus 1. 1 cubed plus 2 times 1 minus 1 is just 2. And then the more complicated one, minus 2 cubed is minus 8. 2 times by minus 2 is minus 4. And then minus 1 gives you a total of minus 13. Plotting that on the graph then, we've got the first point at minus 2, minus 13, which are roughly there. Then we've got minus 1, minus 4, roughly there. 0 minus 1, roughly there. 1, 2. And then finally 2, 11. We're looking at roughly there. And then you join them with as smooth a curve as you can. And it was, if you got the table correct, you just picked up 2B, well, it's a B2 awarded for correct table. If you got 2 of the 3 values correct, you could have got 1 of the 2 marks. So B2 for my table, because I got all 3 right. If you got 2 out of the 3, you could get 1 mark. And then again, it was an M1 for plotting the points correctly from your table, and an A1 for complete graph. If you, for example, and this is an awkward one because you can kind of get a follow-through mark for this. So if you, for example, let's just say for the sake of explaining, I'd worked this one out incorrectly and I found it to be minus 4. So I would get a B1 for the table, but if I'd have plotted that correctly here and drawn the graph, I could still get the 2 marks. It's called a follow-through mark for your method. Okay, question 7. My mind went a little bit blank on this one when I was doing it in the exam, and so I knew that I was wasting a bit of time, so I just left it and came back to it. I just couldn't spot it to start with. When I came back, I spotted it very quickly. If I want to work out the size of this angle, I broke it down to work out the size of this angle and the size of this angle. So the size of so if I call that y and that z, the size of angle z would be equal to the exterior angle of a octagon, which would be 360 divided by 8, which would be 45. If I worked out the size of these 2 angles added together, that's just the exterior angle of a pentagon. So y plus z has to be equal to 360 divided by 5 this time, which is 72. So the actual angle y is going to be equal, I said 72, but for some reason wrote 25, 72. So the actual size of angle y is going to be 72 minus 45, which is just 27. So if that's 27, that also would be 27. So x is going to be equal to 180 minus 2 lots of 27. So that's 180 minus 54, which would just be 126. And marks for this were an M1 for working out the exterior angle of the octagon, an M1 for working out the exterior angle of the pentagon, and then a method for subtracting, a method for finding out the remaining angle, the size of angle x, and then an A1 for 126. I'm sure that there were other ways you could have done it. I saw a few people trying to work out the interior angle by doing 180 times by 3 for this one, and then 180 times by 6 for this one, and then they kind of got a bit lost. Working out the exterior angle is always the easier one to work out. Okay then, for question 8, is it 8 next? It is. Again, fairly straightforward mark. S dashed means the probability of S not happening. So if the probability of S happening was 2/9, the probability of S not happening is just 7/9, because they need to add up to 1. We're told Miles put, and I struggled with this slightly. I thought it was the same question, but it's not. Mars puts 3 green blocks, 5 white blocks, 1 pink block in a bag. He takes at random a block from the bag. He writes down the colour. He puts the block back in the bag so we don't change the probabilities at any point. He then takes a second and writes down the colour. Work out the probability that he takes 1 white block and 1 pink block. So for this, he could have either picked a white then a pink, or he could have picked a pink then a white. So probability of picking, so we'll do it as 2 separate ones, white then pink. We want to do probability of picking white then pink plus the probability of picking pink then white. So probability of picking a white then a pink would be 5 out of 9 times by 1 out of 9. And the probability of picking a pink then a white would have been 1 out of 9 times by 5 out of 9. So that's going to be in effect, that's going to be 5 out of 81 plus 5 out of 81, which is going to give us 10 out of 81. For the second part, the mark scheme didn't actually have this question on the paper, so I'm assuming I'm right, but I've not double checked. I'll speak to Mr. Nation later and just check whether he agrees with me, but I'm fairly confident with it. At least one of the blocks he takes is white. If I'm after the probability of at least one of the blocks being white, I could have kind of done this in quite a complicated manner. The way I'm going to do it is the probability, I'm going to say that it's going to be 1 minus the probability of no white. So that's going to be 1 minus the probability of not picking white the first time. If there are 5 white blocks, the probability of not picking a white is there are 4 blocks left over out of 9, and then that's the same the second time. So that's going to be 1 minus 16 out of 81, which is going to just be 65 out of 81. Right, so marks for this then. The first one is just a B1 mark, correct answer only. So B1. For the second one, it is kind of a B1 for the correct probability shown, an M1 for the correct method of adding them together, and then an A1 for the 10 out of 81. And then I've gone for, there was no mark scheme for this, so I kind of had to make it up. I knew it was worth 2 marks though, so I awarded an M1 for an attempt, a correct method, and then an A1 for the correct answer. For question 9, I did a bit of working on this, and I put them both, all of them, I wrote them as powers of 2. So that one's already a power of 2 to 0. This one would be 2 to the half. This one would be 2 to the minus 1. And this one would be 2 to the minus a half. And then from then I can just arrange them in power size. So the smallest one there is going to be 2 to the minus 2, because minus 2 is the smallest number out of the powers. I've got 0, half, minus 1, minus 2, and minus a half. So my next smallest one is minus 1, which was a half. My next smallest one is minus a half, which is 1 over root 2. My next smallest one then is 0, so 2 to the 0. And then my largest one is 2 to the half, or root 2. So marks for this, if you got it all correct, it was obviously 2 marks. However, if you got 1 out of order, you could get 1 mark, or if you'd shown all of them as powers of 2, you could get 1 mark. For this one, I personally started by rationalising the denominator. So if I rationalise the denominator first of all, I'd need to times by root 2 over root 2. So that would become 2 root 2 over 2. So I've rationalised the denominator, and I still need to cube that. So that's going to be just root 3 cubed, root 2 cubed. And then if I cube that value, that would leave me with 2 cubed is 8. So I'm after the square root of 8. The square root of 8 then, if I do that into third form, so 8 is 4 times 2, and the square root of 4 is 2. So that's just 2 root 2. So 2 root 2 is your value. And it was an M1 for rationalising the denominator, an M1 for the method of cubing it, and then an A1. But you could have picked up those in a different order, but essentially that's where the 3 marks came from. By that I mean, I'll do it as a second method just to talk you through it. If you weren't confident with this and you wanted to cube first of all, that would have been 8 over the square root of 8. Then so that gets rid of the cube straight away. And then if you try and rationalise that denominator, times by root 8 over root 8. That gives you 8 root 8 over 8, which gives you root 8, which gives you 2 root 2. And again, in a sense, the m's are still the same point. So M1, well, you can do an M1 for the method of cubing and an M1 for the method of simplifying, rationalising the denominator. Still 3 marks either way. Okay. And then the final question. Okay. So there is nothing wrong with having plenty of working space and doing each part of this individually. I'm going to start by factorising that denominator. Sorry. So if I factorise that, I can take out as a common factor 2x squared, and that leaves me with x plus 3. The other bit that I can't really simplify currently is 6x cubed. Then I've got to factorise both of these quadratics, and they're not particularly nice quadratics. But if we think about it, realistically, for this to simplify, one of these brackets should be an x plus 3. So that kind of gives us a hint. If we've got 2x and an x, if I just try having a plus 3 there, that would mean that for this value I would need minus 5. And does that actually work? Well, that would give me 6. Minus 5 would give me 1. So that does work. Then for factorising this, and I'm not suggesting that you need to do it this way, it just gives you a bit of a heads up. For this to simplify nicely, realistically, it would need to have an 2x minus 5 there. And does that work? I would need to make 15, I'd need an x and another minus 3. And that does work. So if we think about it, that would give you minus 6. Minus 5 would give you minus 11. So if you think about that the question is designed to try and simplify, it can give you a hint with your factorising. So we can cancel that and that. And then finally, we can actually cancel 2 goes into 6 3 times. And we can cancel by an x squared diagonally. So my numerator is just then 3x. And my denominator is just x minus 3. I actually thought for 3 marks that was quite hard. I've seen them be much more generous with the marks for that. In a sense, the marks were picked up for, if I go blue, 1 method mark for factorising any of the 3 parts, 1 method mark for simplifying any part. So if, for example, you'd only simplified 1 bracket, that would be 1 mark. and then an A mark. Oh wait, so I've written on my mark scheme that it was a C mark. Let me just double check, because that doesn't, it does say C1 mark. Not sure whether I would have agreed with that being a C mark. C mark tends to be for communication, but there we go. So that's that paper then, out of 40 marks. I didn't think it was a bad paper. I thought it was pretty decent. If I just show for anyone watching it, back of the mark scheme, we've got the 10 questions and how they relate to a specific topic. So if you particularly struggled on one of the aspects or one of the questions, so for example, question 8 was on probability, or that was the higher end of probability, that could give you a hint for your more specific revision. But other than that, thank you very much for your time. Feel free to type into the chat any questions or comments you have, and I will see you soon.